listening to Thunder Radio, the podcast of the Manitoba First Nations Education Resource Centre.
Thanks for joining us today on Thunder Radio. Robert-Falcon Ouellette is a name many people are familiar with, especially in Winnipeg. He ran for mayor in the last civic election and seemingly came out of nowhere and came in third in the results. And just over 2 months ago, he was elected the MP for Winnipeg Centre. And we were very honored that he took some time from his incredibly busy schedule to come to our studio here and chat about, among other things, the recent election, his role as MP, and what he hopes to accomplish for Winnipeg Centre. What I like about Dr. Robbie, as many people call him, is that when you talk to him, you really don't feel like you're talking to a politician. He is very personable and down to earth, and it was just really enjoyable to hear what he had to say, and I hope you enjoy listening. And one more quick note. We did have some construction going on next door to our studio when this was recorded, so that's what some of the background noise is that you will hear throughout. Okay, so enjoy. So I am very excited to have the Falcon, Dr. Robert-Falcon Ouellette, in the studio today. Thank you so much for coming.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Oh, well, we appreciate that you're here. It's very exciting for us. So to begin, tell us, what has your first few months, or I guess 2 months? 3 months?
2 months, yeah.
2 months as an MP been like?
Almost three.
Almost three.
Well, it's very interesting. It's a really interesting place, Ottawa. I'm really enjoying my time here in Winnipeg, but Ottawa's it's almost two different worlds. The things you do here in the constituency and in your city, and then what goes on in Ottawa is also very, very different. And it's interesting to see the difference between these two places. For instance, in Ottawa, a lot of my time is spent on Parliament Hill. So spent waiting for votes or waiting to go into the chamber during debates, and also a lot of time in my office getting ready for some of those debates or committee meetings. And then the difference here is I spend a lot of my time meeting with people, my constituents, the people who elected me and who I really care about and whose lives I want to improve, and trying to take their information and going to find the right person in Ottawa who I can talk to in the bureaucracy or in the political realm, either the political attaches or the political the chiefs of staff and the ministers, in order to find out who can actually affect that policy change.
And speaking of your constituents, Winnipeg Centre, I've heard you speak about some of these things before, but what are the main things that you want to accomplish for Winnipeg Centre?
Well, there's a number of them. The first one is child and family services. So I'm really concerned about this. 88.3%, almost 89% of children who were taken into care of the state actually have no allegations of abuse. They're there because of issues related to negligence, meaning the inability of parents to provide good housing and food for their kids. So that leaves around 11%. Of that 11% who have allegations of abuse, only 11% have a substantiated abuse that they can actually find. So meaning the vast majority of children who are taken by CFS are taken because of poverty issues. And this for me is simply unacceptable because we just finished the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, with its 94 recommendations, and the first 5 have to do with child and family services across this country. And here in Manitoba, we've taken thousands and thousands, almost over 11,000 children, and we place them in the care of other people. And it's almost become a natural resource unto itself. The greatest natural resource of Manitoba is our children. Unfortunately, it's not perhaps the way that we expect them to be the greatest natural resource, in that people, we take the children, we give them to someone else to raise. We pay other people money in order to raise those children, and we provide lots and lots of jobs for many, many people. And it's not to say that foster families aren't doing a good job, that they're not good people. It's just to simply say perhaps we've gotten a little too far to another extreme in trying to fix problems which are fixable in a different way. And so for me, I'm often talking about child and family services. I don't know if you knew this, but 24% of all First Nations children before the age of 15 will be in the care of the state in Manitoba.
I didn't know that.
1 out of 4. So if you're a First Nations person, likely you have a 1 out of 4 chance to be in the care of the state before the age of 15, which is an incredible statistic. If any other social group in our society was faced with a similar statistic, there would be a revolution in the streets. People would be tearing down the legislature building. There'd be mass insurrection because people would say, hey, this is unacceptable that you could come into my home and take my kids. And so this is one of the things that I'm working on, and I'm really pushing Ms. Carolyn Bennett to start looking at. Reconciliation for me is not just about the symbolism and murder missing women as well, which is also very, very important, but it's about how we live our future, and the future is the kids. And so that's the main thing that I'm working on. The second one is poverty. So ensuring that we actually get our child benefit. So it's this $600 guaranteed income per month per child across this country. And to make sure that parents can get this money and that they use it appropriately to look after their children so they don't have to lose their kids to Child and Family Services. So Winnipeg Centre, the poorest riding in the country, that's poorest riding in the country. So this is one thing I'd like to see, us eradicate, and to give opportunity to these children to have, maybe not have to climb a mountain in order to succeed in life, but maybe just the hill, maybe they struggle a bit, but make sure that struggle is not so difficult that they give up. And so those are the two things. And then the other thing is I'm looking at rail relocation. I'm working quite hard on that.
Oh, that's right.
So
yes.
Trying to ensure that we actually have an efficient public transportation system. Studies out of Harvard show that when you have an efficient public transit system, it actually allows greater social mobility. And so if you have an inefficient public transportation system, what happens or ends up happening is people can't move around a city or get to the resources that are available to them. And so an example of this is a student when I was teaching at the University of Manitoba, when I was a prof there, and I was teaching there, I'd have a student in the nursing program, just gotten off welfare. She was living in the north end of the city, and she was trying to get to the nursing program at the U of M in the south end of the city, taking public transit. And she'd show up late, she'd miss half her classes, and I'd be like, well, you need to get here earlier. Well, I have to look after my kids, Robert. My kids going to school at this time. Well, maybe you can get them in daycare. Well, that's expensive, $7, or $8, for the morning, $8 in the evening. I can't afford that. I just got off welfare. Okay, and can you get someone to look after your kids for you? Oh, Robert, I don't want what happened to my kids or what happened to me to happen to my children. I want to make sure that my children are safe, and I'm the one who's going to look after them. They're my responsibility. And so a mother who really cares about her kids, because she had to drop them off at 9 o'clock in the morning or 8:45, by the time she gets to the University of Manitoba, an hour and 30 minutes later by the bus, it's too late for her to take a full course load, and so she can't get all the grants and all the the bursaries and the scholarships that she deserves, and so she's no longer going to school today because she has other social constraints, and because we don't provide an efficient public transportation system for someone who is on the lower end of the socioeconomic sphere, meaning she's poor, she can't access the tools and become a successful nurse making $70,000 a year and contribute to society and reach her full potential. And then with the repercussions for that is her children won't be probably as successful as they could be as well, because income often gives you access to even other greater resources, more education, and even like soft education or the hidden curriculum, the things that you learn by like for instance, if you have extra disposable income, maybe today I'll take my kids to the museum for an afternoon. Well, that's a learning experience for those children that otherwise they might not get if you can't afford it.
Yeah. So you'll have to forgive my ignorance. I don't know a lot about the process of these things, but you have these issues like poverty, CFS, and you go to Ottawa. What specifically do you do to try and get them dealt with? Do you just, you speak to people, you debate? What's the
for instance,
process?
so we have every Wednesdays we have our caucus meetings. So a caucus is every member who's a Liberal gets together in the various little groupings. So Manitoba, or the Western Caucus, gets together at I think at 8:30 in the morning. And then we talk about for an hour some of the issues that are really affecting us and what we want to see happen. And we often we try and invite ministers to come in to speak to them, to tell them what we'd like to see happen. And so we have access to the ministers directly in that time period. And then we also have the larger caucus for 2 hours, starting I think at 10 in the morning, and that goes until noon. Where Mr. Trudeau speaks, and then we have and then we get up and speak for a couple of minutes about a subject that we really think is important. The Liberal Party should be looking at, and the executive, because government's divided up into the three branches: the judicial, the legislative, and the executive. The executive runs government. The legislative legislates or creates the laws of government, and then the judicial interprets those laws in the court system. And so I'm part of the legislative branch, but as I work to make the laws, I'm trying to influence the executive in how they carry out those laws.
I see. Thank you.
pretty interesting, but
no, it is. It's something I remember learning. In
school, yeah.
In high school,
yeah,
yes.
So I'm living the textbook.
No, that's wonderful. Switching gears just a little bit, looking back on when you started your political journey, I guess.
Yeah.
Where did you think it was going to lead you? Did you think it would be here, or?
Well, no, you actually don't think. I don't think that far ahead. What you actually think about is, just trying to survive through the next few months. Because when I was running for mayor, it's a lot of work. You have to come up with some policies. You have to think about the various aspects to them. If your idea is good, if there are weaknesses in the idea, and how you can make it stronger, and when the media asks you questions, in order to be able to answer those questions fully. They'll ask a question about budgets. Who have you talked to? And if you can't answer those questions, well, you look rather silly. So then that takes a lot of work. And I must say, I was quite surprised about the amount of work that goes into running for public office. And it's also trying to find a team around you. And so, just surviving, I think, was our main consideration. And then when the election was over, we're, sitting around thinking, that was a fun experience. We had a really good time. I have to admit, when I first started, I didn't believe that, I had this belief that, if you were, in order to run for office, you actually had to be part of the elite of a city, of a society. That no one else would listen to you otherwise. And what I discovered was, in fact, actually, if you are smart, intelligent, you surround yourself with some smart, intelligent people as well, that in fact you can actually challenge the power structures of our society and have a pretty good go at it, and do so in a credible way.
And regarding your recent campaign, was there a particular moment when you thought, yes, I got this? Or right up until the end, were you?
It was about a month before the end of the election.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's because what happens is we always knew it was actually going to be quite close because I don't jump into something unless I was running for mayor because I thought I could win. I thought it was still a long shot, but you never know. And people said, oh, you came close. Well, I always believed in that if I had another week or 2 weeks, I would have been the mayor of the city. But anyways, that's for another time. But running in Winnipeg Centre, we always knew that we'd done our polling, and we knew that it was going to be close. You flip a coin essentially in the air, and it was going to be down to the ground game and who could get people out to vote. And then the Liberal Party made a few mistakes on a number of issues, which made it much more difficult. But then we slowly climbed out of that little basement, and we were doing our door-to-door and really working hard. And we were still having good poll results. So we were still within the margin of error, and we were a little bit behind. Sometimes we were ahead, but we always thought we could win it. And it was just, I think, after the first debate in September, around the beginning of September, where all of a sudden, not only are we neck and neck, actually we're far enough ahead now that this is ours to lose. And I think at that point I stopped sleeping. because now that you no longer have your head, just trucking along or motoring along. You're now. I'm looking up, thinking, okay, what am I doing after this, and how do I go about doing things afterwards, and how do I set myself up afterwards to be successful in the role that I've trying to do. It's great to have a lot of ideas, but you have to make sure that you can follow through with them and succeed at them. And so I think that was a bit of a nerve-wracking thing. And then the election, I think after the election, I didn't sleep for about 3 weeks either. Just pure adrenaline. It was a great experience.
Yeah, no doubt. And you mentioned getting people out to vote when you were speaking. And I think youth and First Nations, for the first time, came out in larger amounts, I believe. I'm not completely sure.
Winnipeg Centre, we went from 48% to 56% voter turnout. It's never actually been that high in Winnipeg Centre. Yeah, I'd like to get it higher. I'd like to get it up into the 60s. And so I'm going to be working on that, making sure that people continue to, young people. I'm still going to a lot of the schools and, and talking to a lot of young people. But I think it was fantastic. I think there was a greater awareness, and I think it stems from I Don't Know More.
Oh, yes.
3 years ago, I Don't Know More happened. People, we were, doing our round dancing and I was participating and afterwards, how do you canalize or, push that energy into something that's going to be productive and useful? And so this is when I ran, that was part of my I Don't Know More, was running for mayor and pushing certain policies that I thought was really going to push society in a good direction. And I Don't Know More, obviously because it was such a short period and such high energy, can't be sustained like that. So it has to find outlets. And I think it kind of woke up a lot of young people, Indigenous people, about the power that they had. And I think, when I ran for mayor, I've talked to many people across the country, they kind of realized, we do actually have a great strength. We can do something. And so now we have 8 or 10 Indigenous members in the House of Commons, 8 within the Liberal Party, 2 within the New Democratic Party, which is incredible, the highest number ever. And that's the power of people coming out to vote. I think there should be 50 Indigenous people in the House of Commons. And I have to say, there's still, like, for instance, I was out in Quebec and I've talked to the former Grand Chief out there, Ghislain Picard, and, they don't believe yet that they're part of Canada and that they should vote. And I just kept saying, look, you only elected one Indigenous person in all of Quebec. That is, that's not very good. It's 25% of the population. You should have at least elected 4 or 5 Indigenous people in that province. And it's probably because you didn't go out and vote. Romeo Saginash, well known NDPer, former Grand Chief of the Cree Council, he should be by himself in Quebec. And I think, here in Saskatchewan and Manitoba, we should have more Indigenous people. Because I think we bring a lot of times a different perspective to what's going on in society, whether it's looking at the environment or the economy or child and family services, or just relations about how Parliament works. For instance, when I sit in the House of Commons, these people are yelling and screaming, and people say, oh, it's just like kids, it's just like being in elementary school. I've been a teacher. I was a teacher for 2 years. I've never had students scream like that and yell like that. There's the level of disrespect. It's absolutely ludicrous to see the yelling.
Why do you think that is? I've often wondered that. When did that become the norm?
I think it's, I don't know when it's become the norm, but I know that this is the culture, even within the Liberal Party. I've been talking to a couple of my colleagues and they say, oh, this is just how it works and this is how we like it. And a couple of us, the newer members have said, well, this is like, we don't do this. Like, how do you, can't even hear the person giving their answer in question period, let alone sometimes the questions being asked. And I even have the microphone or a little speaker earpiece where, and even though I'm bilingual and I shouldn't be able to need it to have the translation. I don't need any translation. I can understand English. I can understand French perfectly well. Je parle très bien français. But I need it because otherwise I won't hear any of the going-ons within the House. And it's like, how can you even have a debate if you can't even hear the answer that someone's giving you to one of the questions that you've posed. And if they think it's all going to be so hyper partisan, maybe they're just going to give you a non-answer. Often question periods actually called the non-question or non-answer period.
I've often wondered that.
But how, I don't know like why they do it. I think it's just a culture that they've come up with for so long. I was kind of hoping it would change a little bit, but with 197 new members who've never sat in the House before, but I kind of having this feeling it's not going to happen.
So you'll have to learn how to yell and scream, I guess.
I sit in the back. I'm a real backbencher. I'm actually in the last row, a couple of rows over from, 2 rows over from Mr. Trudeau. So he's in the center. So I get a good view of what the going is on. I don't think, most people won't see me in the videos.
Okay.
So I get to sit back. You actually won't see me standing up very often either, because often what happens is you'll see them stand up for any answer their side gives, and then jeering at whatever the answer the other side gives. And so far I'm staying generally away from it. I will, if it's a good answer, I will stand up and give an applaud to someone, but if it's even a good question, sometimes I'll do a little silent applauding. And a couple of times I've enjoyed some of the questions. I thought they should have deserved a greater answer.
Getting back to your Indigenous background, I wanted to ask you about, because Winnipeg Centre is very diverse, obviously, and I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how your background as an Indigenous person can possibly help bridge all the diversities, the differences, the different groups of people, if you think it can, and how you do that.
Well, 20% of the riding, or 19% of the riding, is of Indigenous origin. 20% is Filipino, 4% Muslim, and then you can decompose it according to other ethnic groups: some Italians, Portuguese, Ukrainian, and I guess people of European heritage, as well as a lot of people from Africa and Southeast Asia, as well as Chinese, to varying amounts. And so for me, I think to be an Indigenous person within the riding, it gives me an opportunity, obviously, to engage with a population which I think a lot of people in the city have viewed as being problematic. And I'm sure no one in the political sphere or in any public institution will put it exactly in those terms. But I believe, if you actually, as an anthropologist, as someone who studies populations and people's fundamental beliefs and foundational value systems, I think if you actually look at how people view the Indigenous people of the city, I do believe they actually view them as a problem.
I'd agree with that, yeah.
I feel bad saying it, but the question is, I think a lot of people are looking, for instance, to someone like myself and asking, how can you encourage this population to be successful? But I also believe, Indigenous people looking at me and saying, how can you give our vision for this country and for this city to that other side as well? How can you be a spokesperson? And so this is an interesting role in trying to bridge the two great divides of our city. And I've talked about this. I talked about this when I was running for mayor, the great divide of our city. And it's going to be a hard one to do this. Obviously, we have a great mayor who wants to do something. I think we have a prime minister who wants to do something. I suspect we have a premier and hopefully who wants to do something as well. But are we really able fundamentally to look at some of the issues that are affecting our society and to honestly come to grips with some of the solutions that might be required on both sides? And I'm not sure we're there yet. This is going to be a long, hard path. For instance, we're here in the Manitoba First Nations Education Resource Center, MFNERC, a great resource institution that has been built by First Nations in order to encourage people in more education. But a lot of people still don't believe in education. They don't see the utility of it, or if they do, they don't believe they can succeed or it's for them. And I think this is one of the most unfortunate things. Or if they do see the education system perhaps as being something that doesn't really reflect who they are or give them the tools that they believe they need to succeed. And so these are the, I worked in the University of Manitoba, and on some level I do agree. But on another level, I think sometimes we just need to get down to it and just do the work in front of us, that we can succeed, that we can be successful at the tasks before us. Because if we're not successful, I think, in education, we're not going to be those warriors that our ancestors wanted us to be when we negotiated, for instance, treaties. In almost all the treaties, there was a section about education. Elders, from 150 years ago, the writings or the words that have been written down during these treaty negotiations wanted their children to be successful in the Western world through the education system in order to have the ability to master the things that the Western people were doing, the non-Indigenous people. And so education was seen as a path to ensuring the survival and long-term success of nations and of just simply of families and communities. And so for me, there's still a lot of work to be done, but it's to convince young people that they can go far and they should be doctors and lawyers and not just simply hairstylists and technicians and the guy, doing the MTerra picking up your garbage, which is also important.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
If you, it's also very important, but those are the jobs that don't pay very well. I want to see Indigenous peoples become so successful that people actually do say, hey, you know what? I want to be Indigenous.
Wow.
There's not, that's there. Who was it that asked that question? Maybe it was Jamie Wilson I was talking to. And, how many, the question we can ask, and, people often complain about the special rights of Indigenous people. But then you ask them, how many of you actually want to be Indigenous with all the social issues that come along with it? Oh, well, not right now. Well, okay. Well, maybe so one day it would be, I would be so proud if, people around the world were saying, I want to be, I'm not sure the term, an American Indian, a Native Indian, a Native Canadian Indigenous person, an Aboriginal person, a Cree person, an Ojibwe, Shnabeg, Dakota, or Métis, Michif. I want to be like them. I want the same values as them because those values have led them to greater success.
How long do you think something like that would take? Because I'm sitting here thinking, that is amazing.
It's going to take one generation. I think we've lit the fire,
right,
and we're calling the young people. And this is why I go to the schools. So, a bunch of school kids from the Wolseley School had written me a bunch of letters, and just after the campaign, and they posted them to my MP address, which is free to write me, by the way. It doesn't cost a stamp at all to write your MP and to write the Prime Minister. You can just put it in the mail, an envelope written with Prime Minister Trudeau, Ottawa, and it'll get there, or Robert-Falcon Ouellette, Ottawa, and I'll receive it. And we had these letters, and so we wrote these responses to these kids answering their questions as I think it was grade 5. And then my staff was like, oh, we'll just put them in the mail. And I was like, no, I'm going to go deliver them to the kids. And so I showed up at the school unannounced, knocked on the door, and I walked in and into the school, and then they're like, oh, the classroom's just down there. The teacher probably will be really happy to see you, we think. So I went down and I gave an impromptu lesson for about 1 hour with these young kids before they're about to go to the Manitoba legislature to see, and learn about the history of the building and have a tour of the place. But I gave them a history of what's going on in the House of Commons, explaining to them, the form of government. And so, it was their first introduction to, our democratic process. And, I was making sure that they felt that their words were important, that they were important. And, maybe the impacts might not be super great. But if they believe their words have an impact and someone was listening, then when they're an adult and they come across situations which they believe are unjust or not right, morally wrong, that they will then believe, hey, if I can complain and I complain to the right person, maybe they'll listen. And they won't go out believing that no one's listening to them, no one cares about their viewpoint. And so for me, it was really important that one step of actually going to see these kids, because one day they will be voters, and if they believe their voice counts, then it will count.
Absolutely. Yeah, oh, that's wonderful. That's where I went to school. I remember it well. The Prime Minister recently presented at the AFN Special Chiefs Assembly.
The Christmas Assembly, yeah. They always have their little Christmas Assembly.
So my question is, he spoke of a nation-to-nation relationship. And my question is what do you think that would look like?
Well, this is the great debate, is what does nation-to-nation actually mean? So for myself, obviously we have First Nations and communities. But I think if we look to treaty, for instance, I think the idea of signing treaty for the historic treaties, the numbered treaties, or even, for instance, the Bay James or the Bay James Agreement in Quebec, these types of treaties are nation to nation. And so it's not just simply one small community of 1,000 people, but it's a larger geographical grouping of individuals who come together to express their vision, to negotiate with also a larger grouping such as Canada, and coming to a solution and an agreement about how they should live together. And obviously I don't think the nation-to-nation agreement has been really respected under the treaties, because I think what's happened is it's the divide and conquer mentality. We're going to deal with one little community by itself with its resource negotiations, and maybe we'll deal with another one later on and another one later on, and we'll get what we want. And that's been the viewpoint, I think, of the federal government for far too long. I think if we look to Quebec, in the 1970s, we signed the Bay James Agreement with the Cree Council, affecting around, I think, over 24, 25 different communities there, who came together, negotiated with the also another at Quebec, I believe, in Quebec, and they came together negotiating with the provincial government about the hydro development going on. They have their own school board. It's huge. It's well run. The kids have a higher level of education. The children have a higher level of education than a lot of other First Nations communities in this country. They have lower levels of unemployment, less drug use, less alcohol issues. People have a greater level of pride, it seems. The communities are better run. They have mayors who run the communities. Also have their Grand Council with their chiefs as well. And they have an understanding about economic development, about how it actually benefits the people of the local community, not just people simply coming in and doing something and then leaving. And this is what I would criticize here in Manitoba, is it often seems we negotiate with one band council and then we move on. One band council, we move on. Absolutely. So our hydro development always seems to move from community to nation. And it's not to say that the community shouldn't be able to negotiate, but one community might have someone who might be an excellent administrator in education. Another community might have someone who might be an engineer and be excellent in negotiating and talking about hydro development. Another one, economic development. Another one in hunting. Another one in social development. But separate, you're much weaker than you are if you were all working together with these strong leaders in all these communities. And I think what's happened in the Bay James, the Grand Council of the Cree from Quebec, is they've been able to combine their resources and become very, very strong. And there was an issue, hydro development 30 years ago, GenPeg. There was a First Nations community that just recently, about a year ago, I believe, was protesting. That the agreement hadn't been honored appropriately, and they occupied the hydro development, or the hydro dam. And I was reading this, and I was thinking to myself, but they still allowed the hydro workers to come in to maintain it. And I thought to myself, geez, how many of those hydro workers are Indigenous? Now, if you were in Quebec, a lot of the workers now are starting to become from the James Bay Cree. They've attained the education levels in order to be able to run the hydro developments themselves, to be true partners, not just to simply be, that token person on the board, but to really have the competence and the level of expertise necessary in order to run these high level operations. and not just to simply say, okay, we're going to give you employment to Indigenous people, and you're the one emptying out the trash can and providing some of the food and doing the food preparation and driving the truck around for the workers, but actually doing the jobs that pay really well, that give a future for people. And so this, for me, if you can do nation to nation, it's really a nation to a nation. And so for myself, it's not Red Pheasant, where I come from, my people come from, is a community, but the Treaty 6 is the nation, and they should be working together, and the government should say, we're going to work with you, but we're going to work with you on a larger scale. Because otherwise, I just don't think it's going to lead to the long-term sharing of success that needs to happen among our communities. You divide, you conquer, or you stand together.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
So if Mr. Trudeau is listening, nation to nation does not mean, Canada negotiating or talking to a smaller community, but talking to a nation, a peoples. Mm-hmm. People.
And then there needs to be unity there.
Yeah. Well, then unity can be created. The James Bay Cree, that was tough for them in the beginning. There was a certain way of doing things, but I think the Quebec government under the Parti Québécois, and also later on with the Liberal government, was willing provincially there to have this negotiation about how they wanted to be successful. And if you look at the difference, for instance, Attawapiskat, Cree Nation, same bloodlines, same peoples, just across the border in Ontario, compared to the James Bay Cree, completely different. One has they both have housing shortages, but one has much better housing stock, much better off. They're much more successful, greater education levels. They're much more involved in their local economy. The other side, a little bit more difficult.
A lot of our listeners are educators or in the education field, so I always like to ask guests if there's a particular teacher that you had or that you remember that influenced you, if it was in elementary school or in university.
I had many.
Yes.
Many great teachers, whether it was Mrs. Leaf in grade 4 and grade 5, or Mr. Burt, the old Scottish man who was quite hard on us and never took anything to be mediocre. He always demanded excellence of us. And even though I was in an inner city school, or, my high school teacher, my band teacher, Mr. Dwayne Hendricks, who gave me his love, care, and protection, even though he didn't have to do it. And even though he realized I came from very humble beginnings, he was always there, always supporting me, even throughout university, and he didn't have to do it. He could have said, "Oh, my time ends now," but he really invested his time and energy into, I guess, this one project. And I was, we're going to talk on the phone, I think, later on this week, and we're going to plan out a bit of my long-term future in politics, because I really have great confidence in his judgments and his understanding of what I want to do in life. And so here, this one individual who's not related to me, who has no financial obligation towards me, or I have no financial obligation towards him, has, this is tough. He's become, like a father. And I say it's tough because, when I was growing up, my father went to residential schools. He was an alcoholic, and I'd often say I don't have a father. I have a sperm donor. Even though I'd see my father once in a while, our relationship was never very great, and I recognized the issues that my father has, and I still respect him for what he was able to do. A very intelligent man, unfortunately, a man who did not have the ability to succeed and reach the full potential that he deserved, even though he was able to go to law school for 1 year. And he should have become a lawyer in the 1970s, and who knows what he would have been doing today. But I still respect him, and in a way I love him. But, and that's quite hard for me to say that, this other teacher, he's like a father.
Yeah.
Because I grew up a long time believing that we didn't have that. And so I think if teachers are out there listening, to realize that you actually, occupy a role of perhaps much like an uncle or, an aunt or, even a mother and a father to many of the children around you. And to always do your absolute best and to expect the best of your kids and to demand it from them. To not simply say, oh, you just showed up for class today and you kept your head down, but to force them to push them to succeed, to demand success from them. Because, if you don't, who will? And they will, you might be tough love a little bit, might be good love, good love, but it's, the kids will look to that later on and say, oh, that person was a good person. They cared about me and they led to where I am today.
Yeah, I think especially with the schools that we work with are on reserves. And when I hear you say that, I think especially for those schools because it's just such a small community and so students need that person to. Well,
actually, I actually have a master's degree in music. I don't know if people know this.
I knew that. A trumpet, I think? Is that what you played?
I used to, but yes. One of the things I used to teach was the Kodai method. And there's this Hungarian, his name is Zoltán Kodai. And he was all about education, how you teach music. And it was all about excellence in music, ensuring that people not just simply accept, oh, we all play the recorder and we do okay at it and, whatever. And the kids don't really care very much, but to actually teach musicality, to teach the arts, and that the human spirit is greater than just simply believing that the pop on or the easy coke that you can get on the radio is all that music's about, but to push the human spirit. But he said back in the 1930s that the importance of a teacher is actually far greater than anything else in our society. Because, for instance, you could be the greatest musician and the director of the Vienna Philharmonic Orchestra. But if you mess up the Philharmonic Orchestra, you might only last one season or one concert if you make a huge mistake, and then you're fired, you're gone. But if you're a teacher of music and you last for 30 years, you can destroy the love of music in the hearts of a generation, 2 generations. And so it's far more important that the teachers realize that they have value, that what they do is important, and to demand excellence of the children and to instill the love of learning in children, because the importance will last into generations.
That's so true, yeah. Do you still engage in music? Do you have time?
I do, yeah.
Yes. What do you do?
I play piano and I have my trumpet.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
so so I'm still playing. I'm actually going to look to find a used piano today and have it shipped to Ottawa to be in my office.
Oh, wonderful.
So I'll be able to play for 15 minutes maybe a day or something like that.
Take a quick break.
Take a quick break, play on it, drive people on the floor mad, the other parliamentarians.
If to the young people out there who may be listening, I don't know if they listen to our podcast, but if they have an interest, not just in politics, but in education, but in just, I guess, getting somewhere, doing something with their future, what advice do you give?
Work hard. And if you think it's too hard, everything is hard. It's like the biker or the guy on his bicycle, in the Tour de France. Whether you're on your bike, driving around Winnipeg, that's hard work. You're sweating hard, and you're pushing yourself. Or whether you're on the Tour de France, it's still just as hard. It never ends up becoming easier. In fact, actually, it becomes harder. Because if I can do it, you can do it too.
Well, that's a great closing, and I hear the construction has started, so that'll be a good signal to end our podcast today. Thank you so much for coming in today. It was wonderful to meet and chat.
Merci à toi.
Miigwech. Thanks again to Dr. Robbie for being here. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Thunder Radio, and next time we'll be talking with some students from the University of Winnipeg about their Masters in Development Practice program, and specifically the Indigenous Development Focus. This program looks at how Indigenous knowledge can help shape development and sustainability. So thank you for listening, and until next time.